All right, so today we're going to be looking at something I think a lot of people are curious about, but maybe don't know too much about.
Okay.
Fur coats.
Yeah.
You know, you see them kind of out and about every now and again.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously they're very expensive.
Yeah.
And so we're going to kind of dive deep into how those are made today. What the process is from like the animal to the actual final garment. And yeah, I think we got some pretty interesting sources here.
Yeah, it's definitely more complicated, I think, than a lot of people realize.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of natural materials involved, a lot of craftsmanship, and then just kind of the economics of the whole thing are pretty interesting too.
Yeah. So the source that we're looking at here kind of starts by getting specific and saying we're talking about real fur.
Right.
We're not talking about the fake stuff.
Right.
So we're talking, mink, fox, chinchilla, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the first things the source mentions is like if you're ever trying to figure out if something is real or fake fur,
Oh, really?
there's a quick text, and that is that real fur is noticeably softer
Okay.
than synthetic fur.
Interesting. So like if you're ever out shopping or whatever and you see something that's like a fur coat and you're like, I
Right.
wonder you could just give it a little
You touch it.
touch.
Yeah, feel it, and if it's really, really soft, there's a good chance it's real.
That's a good tip. I like that.
Yeah.
So it's not just, one kind of fur though, right?
Right.
The source mentions that, each animal's fur has its own kind of personality, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly. Like, mink is really popular because it's durable.
Mm-hmm.
Sable is known for being super soft and silky, almost weightless.
Wow.
And then lynx fur is just rare, so that makes it more valuable.
Okay.
So, it's almost like an artist choosing the right pigment,
Right.
right,
Right.
for their painting.
They got all these different options.
Yeah.
So where do these pelts even come from?
Yeah.
I'm picturing like rugged trappers, out in the wilderness or something. But I'm guessing it's not quite that simple.
Not really.
Mm.
I mean, there are still trappers out there, but the source mainly points to these official auctions that happen all over the world.
Oh, okay.
Places like Finland, Denmark, the U.S. even.
Ah.
And these events, they happen every year, and they're like the main source for furriers to get their pelts.
Okay. So it's like a big industry event where everybody goes and they're bidding on, the
Exactly, yeah.
different types of furs.
It's like a big marketplace, yeah.
Interesting. And what's this about fur farms in Greece?
Oh, yeah, that was interesting. The source mentioned that.
Yeah.
In places like Sciatista and Castoria, they have fur farms.
Huh. I did not know that.
Yeah, it just goes to show how global this whole industry is.
Yeah.
And the source makes it clear that the animals on these farms, they're bred specifically for their fur. They're not taken from the wild.
Okay, so they're not like going out and trapping these animals. They're specifically raised.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so we've got our pelts. They've come from the auction or from the farm. What happens next? Like, how do they go from a pelt to an actual coat?
Well, that's where the artistry comes in.
Yeah.
The source kind of outlines this four-stage process, and it all starts with sorting.
Okay.
So you've got all these pelts. They have to be grouped by color, by size, by quality, kind of like a chef organizing all their spices before they make a big meal.
So you want to make sure you have the right ingredient for each
Exactly. Yep.
part of the coat.
You want the best quality for the most visible parts and
Right.
and so on. Yeah.
And this is happening on a large scale, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There are companies that specialize in this. The source mentions one called eFurs. They work with a lot of tanneries in Castoria, Greece.
Wow. So it's going from these international auctions to like a specific area in Greece.
Yeah, it's like a hub for processing.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so the pelts are sorted. What happens next?
Okay, so stage 2, this is where the real craftsmanship comes in design and cutting.
Okay.
So they actually cut the fur into strips and then resew it.
What? Why would they do that?
Well, it actually makes the coat stronger, and it helps with insulation, too.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like a fur jigsaw puzzle, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so it's not just like draping the pelt over someone. It's like they're really...
No, it's way more intricate than that.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm starting to understand why the source calls these coats like pieces of art.
Right.
Because that is a lot of like handmade detail.
It is, yeah. It's very different from mass production,
Yeah, okay, so then what's next?
Okay, so stage 3 is washing.
Okay.
But it's not just about cleaning the fur. They actually have this process that makes the fur even softer and fluffier.
I can practically feel it.
Yeah.
Just like thinking about it.
It's amazing.
Okay, last stage. Bring on the glam, right?
Yeah, this is where it all comes together, stage 4. It's the finishing touches, the buttons, the lining, the clasps, all that stuff that turns the worked fur into the actual coat that we recognize.
Okay, so we've gone from option to sorting to cutting to washing, and then
To
finally
the final product.
to the finished coat. Quite a journey.
It is.
But let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Okay.
The price tag.
Yeah.
Why are these things so expensive?
Well, the source actually breaks it down pretty well.
Okay, good.
And it's more complicated than you might think.
Okay.
It starts with the pelt itself, those auction prices we talked about.
Yeah.
If there's high demand for a certain type of pelt, that's going to drive up the initial cost.
So if like a rare lynx pelt goes for a fortune at auction,
Right.
that coat is starting off pricey before they even do anything to it.
Exactly. It's just supply and demand,
Basic economics.
Yeah.
But what else is factored in?
Well, the type of fur itself is a huge factor.
Okay.
Like the source lays it out pretty clearly. Lynx fur is generally more valuable than mink fur,
Okay.
which is more valuable than, say, rabbit fur.
So you got like a hierarchy?
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Okay, so raw material cost, but then there's all that craftsmanship.
Right.
Is that where the bulk of the price comes from?
I think that's a big part of it because each fur coat is basically unique.
Mm-hmm.
It's handmade. It's not mass-produced. So you're paying for hours of skilled labor.
So it's like the difference between a hand-painted vase and a factory-made mug.
Exactly, yeah. Perfect analogy.
Okay, so it's not just the material, it's like the time and the skill that goes into it.
Absolutely.
The slow creation process.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Anything else that adds to the cost?
The last thing the source mentioned is the size and production time.
Okay.
So obviously a longer coat needs more material, more hours put in, and that means a higher price.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's logical, but it's worth pointing out.
So we've got the pelt price, we've got the type of fur, the fact that it's handmade, and then just the amount of work involved.
Right.
No wonder these things are considered luxury items.
Yeah.
Okay, well, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay, what's that?
So we learned that these pelts are sourced globally, often from these specific auctions. Knowing that, does that change how you view the exclusivity and the value of a fur coat?
That's an interesting question.
Just something to mull over as we move into the next part of our exploration.
Okay, I would think about that.
That sourcing thing, it really makes you think about the whole, the background of these fur coats.
It does, yeah. It's not just about the final product.
Yeah.
It's like this whole global network
Exactly.
that goes into making it.
Yeah, and I think it'd be interesting to kind of look at the historical side of things now, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, how did fur go from being, purely practical to this, like, high fashion luxury image?
Right. Well, I mean, if you go way back, fur was all about survival.
Yeah, cavemen and stuff.
Exactly. Just basic necessity.
Yeah.
But the source kind of traces that shift towards status back to like ancient civilizations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Egyptian pharaohs, Roman emperors, medieval royalty.
Okay.
They all used fur as a way to show off their wealth and power.
It's interesting how these materials take on that meaning,
It is, yeah.
From, like, keeping you warm in a blizzard to, like,
Exactly.
being a symbol
It's
of...
a status symbol.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that association with luxury, it just continued through the centuries, like all those portraits of European monarchs,
Oh, right, yeah.
all decked out in their fur-trimmed robes.
Yeah.
It became like a visual shorthand for opulence.
Yeah, okay, so by the 20th century, fur coats are already like this established status symbol.
Right.
But then things get shaken up a bit, right?
Right.
With mass production
Yeah.
and then the arrival of like synthetic alternatives.
Exactly. Like the 20th century was all about making fashion more democratic.
Mm-hmm.
New technology made clothes more affordable, more accessible to everyone.
Right.
But fur coats, they kind of remained in that luxury realm.
Or because of the cost, I imagine?
Partly, yeah, because of the inherent costs we talked about, but also because of that, history of luxury.
Right, okay, and then you have faux fur coming onto the scene.
Right.
Offering like a less expensive animal-free option?
Yeah.
I'm guessing that had a pretty big impact on the industry.
Oh, huge, yeah. The emergence of high-quality faux fur in the latter half of the 20th century
Yeah.
really gave people an alternative.
Yeah.
And it definitely led to a dip in real fur sales,
Yeah.
especially among younger generations who are starting to become more aware of animal welfare.
Right, so we've seen fur go from like basic necessity to a sign of wealth, and now it's like navigating this whole ethical landscape.
Exactly.
It's like fashion is never just about the clothes.
No, it's not.
It's like reflecting our values.
It reflects our values, how we relate to the world around us.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
It is.
And it kind of makes me wonder, like, how do people view fur coats today?
That's a great question for our listener, actually.
Yeah.
Knowing this whole history, how do you view fur coats today? Are they a relic of the past, a timeless symbol of luxury, or something else entirely?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
Something to think about for sure. Well, while our listener is pondering that, we're going to delve into the future of fur.
Okay.
What innovations and trends are shaping this industry?
All right, sounds good.
More on that in just a moment. All right, so the future of fur, kind of tricky to predict, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's a bit of a crossroads right now.
Yeah. We've talked about the craftsmanship and the cost, but like also these changing attitudes towards fur.
Right. Exactly. Like on the one hand, there's definitely a movement away from fur.
Yeah.
Driven by ethical concerns and the fact that, faux fur is getting so good these days.
Yeah, our source mentioned that like some big luxury brands are even going fur free.
Yeah.
And some countries are banning fur farming altogether.
It's a big shift.
Yeah, it really seems like things are changing.
Yeah, it definitely points to a cultural shift.
Yeah.
Fur is becoming less acceptable to a lot of people.
Right.
But, the source also points out that real fur still has its dedicated market.
Yeah, I guess those who really value like the heritage of it,
Right,
the
exactly.
unique feel,
Yeah, that handmade aspect.
artistry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, there's also the argument that fur, if it's sourced responsibly,
Yeah.
can be a sustainable option.
Right, it's a natural biodegradable material.
Exactly. Unlike synthetics, which, rely on petroleum products and all that.
Yeah, so it's not as simple as,
Right.
just saying fur is bad.
Yeah. It's a complex issue
Yeah.
with valid points on both sides.
Right.
I think ultimately the future of fur is going to be shaped by a bunch of different factors.
Yeah.
Consumer demand, how much better faux fur gets, and, those ethical conversations that are constantly evolving.
It's a good reminder that fashion, like anything else, is constantly changing.
Absolutely.
What was once like a must-have can become outdated,
Totally.
and what was once controversial can become the norm.
Yeah, and vice versa. You never know.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the takeaway for our listeners is like, stay informed. Be part of those thoughtful discussions.
Right.
And, ultimately make choices that align with your own values. Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of fur coats, I hope this has given you a deeper understanding of, how these garments are made.
Right. From pelt to coat.
The journey.
The whole journey.
The factors that drive those prices.
Right.
The ethical considerations.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But hopefully it's been enlightening.
Yeah, and maybe it's even sparked some new questions.
Yeah.
Or challenged your own views.
That's what we're all about here.
Exactly.
Exploring, learning, and engaging with the world around us in a more informed way.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.